And then, all right, and then I'll turn it over to you, Susan.
Okay, well, let's get my slides started from the beginning. And I will switch over here. So anyway, Robin, thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad everybody's here. Today we are going to talk about beginning genealogy, and then I'm going to bring up another presentation where we can talk about what we have at the Clayton Library. So I am Sue Kaufman, and I am manager of the Clayton Library. And just to give you a little background about myself, I did not do genealogy when I became a genealogy librarian. I've been a genealogy librarian for, well, since 1987, whatever that is, you know, it's a long time. And I come to genealogy actually through sociology. I'm originally from Illinois, and when I moved, I'm from Chicago, and I went to school in Southern Illinois, and then I moved to Central Illinois to Peoria. And there were two jobs at the Peoria Public Library. One was genealogy and one was children's librarianship. And so I took the genealogy job. I had an interest in family, of course, with the sociology background. I had done a little traipsing around, you know, like we all do, you know, in cemeteries and things like that. But I had never formalized anything. And I tell everybody that because doing genealogy is really, that's a huge project. I want to work on my family history is huge. But the important thing is breaking it down, and we'll talk about this, into what you want to know, who you want to work on, what time period, and where. So you have to really formulate a research question. All right, and we'll talk about that as we get into, I'll show you some pedigree charts and things like that, so we can begin to formulate questions so you can feel directed in your research and in control of your research. So this is very nice because this is a three-part series, and tonight we are doing beginning genealogy and the Clayton Library. And the Clayton Library is part of the Houston Public Library, which is the genealogy library of Houston Public, and that's all we do. That's all we have, and we have an international collection. And the second part of my presentation tonight, we'll talk about what we have at the library. My colleague Irene Walters is coming on the 23rd and the 30th of September to talk about genealogy tips and tricks, finding someone by not using known information, which is an interesting topic, and then ways to get the best from our computers is her second presentation. And I am imagining that these two will be also recorded also, so we can get those. So let's talk about family history just kind of quickly. What is it and why? It is obviously a study of determining family relationships. How is someone related to us? Who is this person on our tree? Or if you're doing DNA, how is that DNA person related to us? There's genetic genealogy and paper genealogy. Tonight, we're talking about paper genealogy, taking those names from your DNA, working it into it to find out, are you my first cousin? Are you my second cousin? Or by some way, do we just share a last name somehow? Okay. So there also is a difference between genealogy and family history, at least in my mind. Okay. Genealogy to me is the names, dates, and places in the pedigree chart. The family history is the stories that go along with that pedigree chart. So when you begin to look at documents and you start looking at, you look at the census, you need to look at the full document. You need to read the will, you need to read the probate, you need to look at the newspaper and all these other things that you're going to use, because there is a story inside all that you can weave. Our ancestors and eventually us are just not a name on a line. We have a family and we have a story. And if you're not interested in the heavy duty research, at least write down the stories. And that also is a big thing, okay? I'm going to write the story of myself, but if you break it down, again, it's all about breaking it down into little pieces. So here's my analogy. My analogy is you go to Target and somebody says, can I help you? All right. And you just say, because you don't want to bother somebody, I want the plastic stuff. Okay. The plastic kitchen stuff. All right. Well, then, okay, well, it's over there. And then you're there and you're walking up and down the aisles because you can't find the garbage cans and you really wanted the garbage can. If you just would have said, I want the garbage can, probably somebody might have taken you over to the garbage cans and said, here they are. Same thing. It's a process. I want to work on my grandfather. What do I want to know about him? Where am I researching? My grandfather died in Chicago in the 1930s, and I want to find his death certificate. Okay, that breaks it down. That makes you feel as if you can articulate to somebody what it is you're looking for, and then find the documents that will give you the answer to your question. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, because there's a whole gamut of when records were created and what you're going to get out of them. And again, it's also a search for our personal past, giving us a sense of place and a sense of self. And we talked about the stories to pass on. You know, I think that if I would have asked my grandmother, especially my grandmother in New York, who came from Romania, more questions, I probably would have gotten more about my ethnic history. I might have gotten more recipes. I might have gotten the story of when she came over, you know? So all these stories keep our family alive. How fast is society now? I think a lot of us, if not all of us, remember going home to make a phone call, okay? And not having that phone, and everything was slower, not instantaneous food, okay, and everything. So, and then of course there's the medical history. I've discovered documents and found out that of course I have ancestors, my grandmother, my father, all had cancer, you know, so you can find these things and then begin to prepare for this. There's a lot of reasons for doing it, okay? And as I mentioned, it's a process. You're going to start with yourself. You're going to talk to people around you. You're going to get those stories. You're going to look around the house for the stuff that you have, and anything can be family history. I have a charm bracelet from my grandmother that has charms. It has my birth date, my sister's birth date, and my mother's birth date on it. 3 separate charms. But there's a charm on it that has from July of 1933 that has a diamond on the 19th. That's the day she got married. Okay, so anything, something that you picked up on a vacation has a story. All right, you went to, England and found some stuff. Something else that's kind of interesting that could even be genealogy. So I have cats. And I had cats since 1989, 1988. Cats get rabies shots, right? I have kept the majority of my rabies tags from all my cats. I got this big ring of them, okay? But there's rabies tags from Peoria, Illinois. There's rabies tags from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And there's rabies tags from Houston. That's my migratory pattern, okay? It's kind of goofy, but it's family history. Because if somebody found that, they would be able to say, wow, here are 3 places that she lived that I might find some documents from. Okay, fine. Gather everything you got, charts and organizations. You got to figure out how you're going to be organized. There are plenty of ways to be organized. There's plenty of sessions and videos on organizing. Do you keep all the families together? We're not going to talk about that, but your chart is the most important thing, your pedigree chart, because that's your map. Seeking help. This is why you're here. This is why we're going to talk about Clayton. And then, of course, what's online versus why you should come to a library. Because not everything is online, because there's something called copyright. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Talk to everybody. Talk to yourself. Okay? Ask yourself questions. What is my favorite color? When was I born? Where was I born? All these things, okay? Look at the family Bible. Look at all these old letters and documents. Anything you got can be family history. Of course, this is the pedigree chart. Most of us are familiar with this. And here, you're putting down the birth, death, and marriage. And here you see that I have a hole. And this becomes the question. Who was my mother's mother, my mother's grandfather? The men are always on top on the pedigree chart. I don't have any information. That becomes my question. And I take information from my mother to get back. It's called deductive reasoning. My mother was born in 1935 in Chicago. First piece of information, where is her birth certificate? That might list her father. What document that my mother created or was created for my mother that's going to give me the answer to the question? What document is going to give me her father's name? You have to become familiar with the documents. Maybe a death certificate, but remember, a death certificate is only good as the person that gave the information. Maybe a marriage certificate, hopefully, if that's what they accumulated. A birth certificate, probably, okay, if it was not a single birth and the father's listed. So there's all kinds of variations, and it might not just be a one-stop shop. You might have to accumulate a number of documents. This again is a pedigree chart that we're all familiar with, and you can see how it works, your name. The men are always on the top of the page or the top of each line, the father, the grandfather. That's just the way it is. There's no real reason other than, I think you can see how they're numbered. You're number 1, your father's number 2, your mother's number 3. Sometimes, I kind of wonder where that numbering came from, but that's just the way it is. There's a certain system of numbering. This is my pedigree chart. This is why you want to have a pedigree chart, okay? Because the things that you can't fill in become your questions, okay? The other thing, this is a very old pedigree chart. I can tell because, so this is the deductive reasoning. I'm looking at this document, okay? So here, my mother died in 1994. So we now know that this piece of paper was created after 1994, okay? Because my mother was gone already. Down here, this note, my grandmother, okay, who happens to be Ida, okay, was still alive. My grandmother died in 2001. So I know that this document was created sometime between 1994 and 2001 because of what's on the document. Okay, so that's that deductive reasoning. See also this information here, these become my questions. When was Morris born? When did Morris die? Who was Morris's wife? The stuff you can't fill in become your questions. It's like your grocery list. That's your job. Your job when you come to a library or even when you open up a database is to figure out what you want to know, okay? You're going to ask yourself, who do you want to work on? What do you want to know? Where are you researching? And when are you researching? What time period? Doesn't have to be exact, okay? It could be Northeast Ohio in the 1860s, okay? And that's okay because then we start narrowing it down through documents. But it's so important to get to that question because if you come in, at least in my library setting, and I would imagine in other library settings, I've worked in 3, and you come in and you say you want to do your family history, we're going to develop a dialogue with you and we'll listen to your story. And then we will, if you will, pigeonhole you into finally formulating a question. If I have to, I will actually say, who do you want to work on and what do you want to know about? If after 15 or 20 minutes, we're hearing that story, because that's going to help you. That pointed question is going to help you and get into it. This happens to be my mother, my father, and my grandfather. And I know that this picture, I don't know the date of it, okay? But I know this picture was taken before 1962 because my grandfather died in 1962. My mother and father got married in 1957. So this picture is dated between that time period, okay? It's just a matter of looking at things, all right? So let's talk about where some of the names are. This is the variation in records that you can use. There's census records. We're most familiar because, of course, we have probably filled them out every 10 years. And we'll talk about those. Vital records, birth, death, marriage. Vital records occur where vital records are housed where the event occurred. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Newspapers, secondary sources, but still valuable because, of course, they recorded things, especially, they were television of the time, you know, when we didn't have television and things like that. Land records often will show different things. You can place a person in a specific place. Military records, wills and deeds, city directories like phone books is a way to sort of describe those. Passenger list for immigration, and then tax records, which are very helpful because they're taken every year. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the census. The first census is 1790. Now we're talking about the federal United States population census, okay? Now the first census is 1790, but it's not for everywhere. It's only states that existed in 1790. So that's the colonial census. Each federal census, the first federal census for each state is on the 0 year after it became a state. So Illinois became a state in 1818. The first federal census is 1920. Texas became a state in 1846. The first federal census is 1850. Okay? There were things that were called territorial censuses because you had to have enough people to become a census. So there happens to be an 1830 and an 1840 census, if you will, prior to 1850. There are also other state censuses that were taken in the off years. 1850 is the first census that everybody is listed in the census. Prior to 1850, I have slides. It just shows the family and everybody's broken up by age and sex and race. 1850 is the first year that everybody's listed. 1870 is the first year that former enslaved individuals are listed because, of course, of emancipation. If you're talking about free African Americans prior to 1870, they will always be listed. In non-slave states, if they're free, they should be listed individually in the regular census population. 1890, we got a problem. Gone, burned. Okay, so gone. There are little pieces that still exist. And then that's when we talk about census substitutes. What other document is going to put a person in a place? School records, those type of things. You know, the tax rolls that I talked about. So you have a problem because you got 1880 and then 1900, which is a long time period. 20 years is a long time period. And that's when you have to, that's the beginning of becoming creative when you're doing research, because when you get past 1850 backwards, you really got to get into those original documents, the wills, the probates, the land records, because nobody's listed other than the head of the household. The 1940 is the most recent census that we can get our hands on. The federal government keeps the censuses closed for 72 years. So that means next year, on April 2nd, I believe, in 2022, we will get the 1950 census. 1940 was a census that really increased the interest in genealogy because it was the first census that we could touch. People were still alive, as 1950 will be another census that we can touch because people are alive, okay? That's what we call it. Variance in questions asked, I'll show you that, and then the variance in the information reported. Each census year asks different questions. Variance in information reported, the only census that we know who gave the information is 1940. Every other census, in my case in New York, it could have been the person that lived in the tenement on the 4th floor talking about my ancestor on the 1st floor. In a rural area, it could have been somebody down the road. So that's why you have to take everything with a grain of salt, and it's a great starting point. There's plenty of variation. There's variation in spelling, there's variation in names, there's all kinds of things. In one census, my great-grandfather Sam is Samuel. In one census, he's S. So that it can cause problems when you're researching and searching and putting names in to search. And my colleague Irene will talk about that in the next session about formulating research questions. So this happens to be 1810 Loudoun County, Virginia. And what we can see here is we see everybody listed. These are just the head of the households. And then what they've done is by age and sex, I don't have the top, but this is males between, I think it's, 0 and 12 or something like that. And then they break it down, and then they go into females, and then they go into slaves. They list slaves. This is what the census looks like from 1790 to 1840, if there is a census for the state that exists, okay? All right, so this is helpful, but you have to start thinking about, you'll take the information from 1850, which looks like this, whoops, sorry, which looks like this. And if we look at this, this is the Tavener family, okay? And here is a 10-year-old, but I'm going to talk about something in a second, okay? So this is 1850. This individual here might have been listed on the 18, whoops, what happened? Oh, my monitor, what in the world is going on? Are you guys still there? Say something.
Yes, yes, Susan, we're still here.
Okay, you're still there, but I don't see, oh, okay, all right, well, let's see. Wait, hang on. I am going to not use, whoops. Let's see. Okay, I'm just not going to use every, I actually have two monitors. Sorry, you guys.
That's okay.
So using that example, here we have this young Tavener who is 10 years old. If we went back into 1840, we would be looking for a male who is about a year old, but his name would not be listed. Okay, he would be with the Tavener family, and none of these children would be there because they weren't born, these 8, 4, and 2, they weren't born by 1840. So you won't see them in those hash marks. You might wonder, and I did this on purpose, there's no parents listed. This is the top of the page on the census. There's no parents listed because it's on the previous page. Okay, and on the previous page, which I don't have, but see what you can get. So this child who's 10 years old was born in Ohio. So that means that this child was born around 1840 in Ohio, okay? All these other children were born in Ohio because of these marks. This person was born in Virginia. So sometime between, so this person was 22 in 1850, and all these people were born in Ohio. Okay, so this person was born in Ohio in 2 years from 1850. That means that the family, actually the parents were born in Virginia too. That means that the family was in Ohio by 1840. The parents on the previous page were born in Virginia. There are no older children. So what I'm saying is that when you look at this, you have to start looking at it and get information out of it. Okay, the parents were born in Virginia. The first child, who's 10, was born in Ohio. So sometime between, I think the parents were about 25, about 35 at this point. So sometime between when they were 25 and 35, they moved into Ohio. You have to look at the information and get information. You have to look at what you're looking at, really. This is the 1930 census, and the 1930 census has a ton and a half of information just comparatively, okay? In previous censuses, like in the 1880 census, they asked if they were deaf, dumb, blind, or insane. And then there was a special census called the D census, the defective, delinquent, and dependent census, that will give you more information about the affliction or if they were in prison. There are things called supplemental censuses, which give you more information. There's an agricultural and a manufacturing census. When you go into the census and you see the occupation, which actually isn't shown here. My grandfather was a furrier. Censuses will give you the occupation. If you see somebody that's a farmer, you should automatically look for land records. Okay, you should also, dependent on the year between 1850 and 1900 are agricultural censuses. You would want to look at the agricultural census to see what their crops were, to see what their livestock was. This is an example of 1930. Now, my father was born in 1930, but my father is not listed on the census. The reason my father is not listed on the census is because this census was taken, my father was born here in April. The census was taken in the spring. My father was born in August. Okay, so when you look at these documents, you have to see when they're accumulated. So my father's not on the census, even though he was born in 1930. The census wasn't taken in December. The census was taken in the spring. Who was living there on April 1st? My father wasn't alive, so he wasn't there. So if you don't think that, then you might wonder why he's not there. The other thing is here's my Uncle Carl. He's 6 years old. Okay, this is 1930. That means my grandparents probably got married around 1924. Go look for a marriage certificate around 1924, 1930. I'm looking for a marriage certificate in New York, in what I believe to be Kings County. Okay. I want to find a marriage certificate around 1924. That's how you're going to formulate your question, because that might give who Emil's parents were and who Helen's parents were to get back the next generation. This is 1940. And in 1940, we happened to see my father, Howard, who was 9. 10 years later, he's there. Interestingly, my father died in 15, but before he died, I showed him this because this was out. And I said, Dad, do you remember having a maid? And he did not remember, which I find interesting considering he was 9 and she was in the house. But but he did not remember. But it's a story too. Dad, when he was in 1940, they had somebody that helped come and take care of the house. That's a little piece of information that I'm getting beyond what I'm looking at here. Okay, let's talk about vital records quickly. Traditionally, birth, death, marriage records. There's variance in years and beginning of the collection and variant in years of opening for research. What I mean by that is, in Texas, birth and death records were not accumulated in Austin until 1903. Houston did not send their birth records or their death records to Austin until 1908. Illinois started collection of their birth and death records and their marriage records in 1916. The counties in Illinois started collection of their birth, death, and marriage records in 1870. These are things that you learn. We do not expect you to know all this. That's why if you came and said, I'm looking for a birth record in Texas in 1890, I might say, go look at the county, because around 1890, some of them started collection, but you're not sending anything to Austin because Austin didn't start until 1903. The other thing about Texas, counties collected marriage records. Marriage records were not collected into Austin until 1965. So if you're looking for a marriage record in Texas pre-1965, you need to know what county you're looking at. Variant and years open for research in Massachusetts, you can get the record the next day, birth, death, marriage, anything the next day. Texas holds birth records closed for 100 years, holds death records closed for 25 years, holds marriage records closed for 50 years. All this stuff has to be learned, and that's why formulating that question is what's important, so we can teach you all that. Newspapers, great source. I think we've all looked at old newspapers. The only thing that you have is remember that it's a secondary source. Okay, so it's not created at the time of the event. Okay, and it's also somebody else's impression. It's not, it's not me saying this is when the birth occurred. Okay, it's not me reiterating who came to my house. It's somebody reporting on it. Okay, so you have to take everything with a grain of salt. The other thing that happens is the reason that you're not finding newspapers very easily from like 1930, 1940 is because there's something called copyright and public domain. Pre-1925 is public domain. That's why when you go to Google and you go to Google Books and you're only getting little snippets, or when you look for newspapers and you can only get little snippets, it's because they're still within copyright. Books are still within copyright, cannot be digitized. That's why you still need to go to a library, because there's plenty of stuff that's not digitized because of copyright. Now, there are newspapers that are digitized, like at newspapers.com or Ancestry or some other commercial sites. That's because they paid for a license. They paid for digitization, and they paid the newspaper company to digitize. That's how we get more recent newspapers, through a subscription. Land and deed records, owned any land, there'll be records for it, can be useful distinguishing between two people of the same name in the same area. When you start looking at the buyer and the seller, those names become familiar. So that's how you can begin to distinguish. Also, you can begin to look at relationships and wonder who those people are. Were they cousins? Were they neighbors? Were they children? Were they parents? Who were those people, and what kind of relationships can you get from that? Military records, there are service records, there's pension applications, there's draft cards, and there's bounty land. Service records, what did someone do in the military? What was their unit? What was their battalion? What wars did they see? Okay, Irene is going to talk about a website called Fold 3, which has those actual documents on it. Okay, pension applications. I'm going to apply for a pension so I can get paid for what I did. There are widows' pension applications. Most pension applications, in fact, I think some of the things that we can find on Fold 3 are through probably the Civil War. I don't think that we can get pension applications digitized for other wars, okay? And I'm not sure where they reside. Draft cards, there are World War I draft registration cards, World War II draft registration cards available on Ancestry, which sometimes show parents, which will give you a description of the individual. There's different groups of draft registrations. There's a first group, there's something called the Old Man's Draft Registration that Irene will talk about, that goes back to people for the First World War that were born around 1874, I think. So there's all kinds of information. Then bounty land, got land for service. Again, land records. Very rarely will you find vital record information in military records, except for maybe a birth date. Chances are you won't find parentage information. You might find wife information and other things if the pension is mentioned. Wills and probates, I think we're familiar with that, if not in our own experience, looking at them. If there is a will, then it will be at the courthouse. If someone died without a will, then they're going to probate it. They died intestate. You'll see inventories in wills. There are a lot of wills digitized at Ancestry and then also at FamilySearch. And I'll show you FamilySearch and Ancestry in a minute, and Irene will go into it a little more. They're very storytelling. If you get an inventory, you can see what people had in their house. You will also find relationships. Sometimes, unfortunately, prior to emancipation, you will find maybe slaves mentioned by name, if not just in a group. So you can learn a lot about a family, but they will, again, the goal is putting somebody in a place in a time period, okay? And doing that through all these documents is what happens. City directories are like phone books. There are some that go back pretty historic, even into London, back into the 1700s, okay? What they basically do is list individuals. In the 20th century, they began listing individuals by address, but different city directories do different things. Sometimes you can find how many minor children there were. You can find an occupation of a person that's working, what they did. It'll list somebody's name, like it'll list my grandfather, it'll say Emo Kaufman, it'll list their phone number, it'll list the company that he worked for, and it'll list their address. Most of them are larger cities and surrounding cities, but there are county directories also, mostly for the early 1900s. And these county directories are interesting because they're usually farmer directories. And they will tell you livestock, like up in the Midwest, where they tell you, the name of the farm and things like that. So, okay. Passenger lists are the dates of immigration, where they came from, if anybody. Sometimes it gives you the country of origin and destination. Sometimes it lists if they have any relatives around already in the country. And some of the indexes are available in book form, on microfilm, and online. When you start going online, one of the biggest things that you'll find are what we call the public domain National Archives records, okay, from the National Archives in DC. That's the census, that's the passenger list, that's the military records. That's why you can find those things pretty easily and digitized, because they're public domain records, because they're created by the federal government. Remembering the stipulation of holding some closed. Here's some examples. This is my grandmother. This is my great-grandmother. This is my great-grandmother, Annie, okay? She actually came, they were from Russia, but see where it says last permanent address, they left from Liverpool, okay? They did not, they went from Russia and then went into Liverpool and lived in Liverpool for a while, where in fact, my Aunt Florence and my Uncle Harry were born, okay? Because in the census, it says England, where they were born. Also a wife and a child, okay? Also see here nationality, country of what country, nationality, so Russia, okay? But here it says England. That's Aunt Florence and Uncle Harry. Now, race or people, Jewish, okay? That always, I'm not too sure that, that Jewish is a race, it's a religion, but that's just the way we think. And then it's saying last permanent address. And then also moving on, it will tell us by who is passage, who is the passage paid, by self, okay, final destination, New York. Now, like census records, passenger lists vary dependent on the year. This happens to be 1907. Pretty complete. Early ones might just list the people that are coming. It also lists a height and then no marks of identification. So dependent on the year, it's dependent on the information. Also, when you're looking, when you're looking at the passenger lists, what's interesting is it will tell you who they were going to, at least in this year. I don't have a slide of it, but it says that she's that. Oh, here, who was it? Okay, this one, the passage was paid by my grandfather, who was already in the country, not South, that was somebody else, but they did come from Liverpool. When you search passenger lists, remember how it said Hebrew and Jewish? I might have put Russian instead of Hebrew or Jewish because I knew that they came from Russia. So you really have to become creative, especially when you're talking about Eastern European or European countries, because of the border changes. We had a lot of border changes in county development here too, but especially over in Europe. And then tax records are at the county level, normally taken every year, normally in rough alpha order. But going back to my example or my mention of the 1880 to the 1900 census, a tax record, if they paid taxes and they should have paid taxes on something, you will find an every year list of individuals. Okay, so that is a way to put somebody in a place in a specific time period during that 20 years that we're missing. So FamilySearch. FamilySearch is a complement to Ancestry.com. FamilySearch duplicates information that's at Ancestry.com, but it also has unique content. So also FamilySearch is the international content that we direct people to if they're doing outside United States research. Because unless you have a personal subscription that is a world subscription to Ancestry, you will get limited international content. Okay. When you go to FamilySearch, you can choose records. When you click on records, what it brings up is what I call the magic box. This is where you're going to put a name in, but I also want you to notice that there's a map there because you can drill down, again, formulating your research question. You can pick the United States, you can drill to the state that you're looking at, and then what comes up is the information and the collection of all the resources that they have for that state. There might be digitized birth records, there might be digitized land records, military information, court records, all kinds of other information where you're going to get a box that you can put a name in. You have begun to narrow your research. This box here will give you results in all the collections inside FamilySearch. Any magic box is going to do that. What you want to do is, again, formulate your question, even if to the researching in Illinois. You can pick the United States, pick Illinois, and then see what's there. You've gone down in your inverted triangle. I want to do my family history. I want to research in Illinois. I want to know about my grandfather in Illinois. I want to know about a marriage record in Illinois. Okay? So you can, now, there's advantages to both because you might discover things through the larger search. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, okay? It just can be overwhelming. Same thing with the countries. We have had people come in and ask for baptisms in Zimbabwe. And interestingly, there happened to be baptisms in Zimbabwe from the middle 1900s to about 1998 because there were missionaries in Zimbabwe. And then they digitized the records and put them up. Ancestry, there's a difference in a way between Ancestry Library Edition and a personal subscription. Ancestry Library Edition is what we have at the library, which does not give you access to the newspapers as a personal subscription does. So the personal subscription is a little more robust, but we have other databases that can also search for that, and you can access from home, and I'll show you how. So this is the homepage of Ancestry. The interesting thing about Ancestry from the homepage is you can directly go into the census. You can search vital records. They have created collections, little pockets of census and voter lists, birth, death, and marriage, military. You can, again, there's a box there to fill stuff out, or you can, again, be more directed in the actual collection that you want to go to. What does the database have for me? People always say, what's the best one? Okay, is Ancestry better than FamilySearch? The best one is the one that has your answer. Okay, and learning what's in it is the most important thing. It's so tempting just to put a name in it, okay? But if you don't know how it's organized, if you haven't looked at a help screen and you put a name in and you're not getting what you want, is it because the marriage in Mississippi that you're looking for doesn't even exist in that database, or you're not searching right? So you have to learn. Ancestry also has the magic box, and then you can see at the bottom of the screen, and then also further down, you also can go in by state to see what collections exist for that state. So after you formulate your question, you can look and say, I'm looking for a marriage in Illinois in 1935 or 1933. Are there any marriages? Are there any little databases, any little collections that say Illinois marriages that cover the time period that I want? It could say Illinois marriages 1900 to 1950. 1933 is in there. I'm going to do that one. Okay, that again is getting down and formulating your research question. So as a wrap up, knowing what you want to know is the key, and the questions guide you. Filling in the stories, begin with stories passed down or an understanding of history, and break down the tasks into bite-sized pieces. Oh, and use your pedigree chart, not your barbecue char, your pedigree chart. Okay, so there's that. Now, I am going, do you have any questions? Because if we can go to 8:15, We can go through some questions really quick, and then I can bring up the library side of the presentation. Anybody have any yet?
I don't have any.
Okay, good. Okay, going once, going twice. All right. So now we're going to talk about using the library. So after you figure out your questions, you're like, okay, what do I do now? And how do I get help? All right. So fortunately, you happen to live in an area that has one of the 10 best genealogy libraries in the country. Okay. We are one of the 10 best libraries in the country, and we have an international collection that we're going to talk about. I'm going to show you how to navigate the website. I'm going to talk a little bit about special collections at Houston Public Library, go over the library catalog, go over our databases, go over the services that we have, and then some of our digitized material, and then, of course, visiting Clayton. Okay? All right. So Clayton is one of 3 special collections that we have at the library. And to find out about the special collections, this is our library website, which is houstonlibrary.org. Pretty easy, okay? So when you go to houstonlibrary.org, to get to Clayton or to get to special collections, you're going to want to click on research, okay? You're going to see the research tab. And then you're also going to see genealogy. And then you're also going to see special collections, okay? When you click on special collections, what you will get is an overview of the 3 different buildings that we have at Houston Public Library. It's very odd. Usually genealogy collections and local history collections, which are the other side, are inside the central library. We happen to have 3 separate buildings, 3 historic buildings that house our special collections. First one is the African-American Library at the Gregory School. It houses the African-American information about the African-Americans in Houston, the surrounding areas, and then the African diaspora into the United States. In a historic building, which happened to be the first African-American elementary school in Houston, and it is in the 4th Ward. So there's exhibits there. There's a recreated classroom from that time period in Freedmanstown. It's very interesting, very interesting. They are an archive, which means they have manuscripts and published sources. The Houston Metropolitan Research Center, if you are doing research about Houston businesses, about Houston churches, about anything Houston, they have over 4 million photographs. They have manuscript collections from businesses and from other churches. They're supplemental to what we have. We work on what I call the micro level, the individual level. The Houston Metropolitan Research level works on sort of an organizational level with organization records, okay? They also have books, and they also have rare books. They are located in the Julia Idison building, which is on the same property as the main library at McKinney, at 500 McKinney. We are the genealogy library. That's all we do, and we have an international collection. We are located in the museum district, right across from the Holocaust Museum on Caroline. We happen to have our main building that you can see here, where all the research collection is. Across the parking lot, we have the historic William Clayton home. William Clayton was born in Mississippi in 1880, got involved in the cotton industry, became very prominent with the Anderson family of the N.D. Anderson, but they developed, it was another brother who they were in the cotton industry. And then William Clayton was also an undersecretary of state during the Marshall Plan. He left his house to the library where the collection was from, moved out from the Idison building, because we never throw anything out in genealogy. I am not a keep. I keep my genealogy stuff. I am a complete minimalist. But anyway, it outgrew the collection, the home. If you go to our library website, houstonlibrary.org/Clayton, you can see a picture of the historic home. But all the material is over on that side in the building. So our locations, you can also find out our locations if you click on special collections, and then you can click on Clayton, and then what brings up is, this is still the main library, it brings up our library, what we call our neighborhood library landing page, where you will get our hours, and our hours right now are 10 to 4. One of the things I want to talk about is, if you see this, and you might have noticed it on the original library homepage, this is constant through the library landing pages, the location pages, and you can always go to special collections. You can get to our resources, and you want to get a MyLink card, because that is what is going to give you, it's the library card, that's what's going to give you access to our databases. Anybody in Texas with a Texas address can get a Houston Public Library card, okay? So that little thing is to remind you that these guideposts are there. You'll find them around throughout the library. That's what you want to do. You want to get a MyLink card so you can get into the databases. We also have a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter, which talks about resources, and then we also have one that talks about our events. So let's talk about our resources, okay, and finding materials at the library. This is our library catalog, okay? So we are one of 46 locations. So you will go to houstonlibrary.org, and at houstonlibrary.org, you make sure that you're on catalog, and you can put your search terms in. Confederate Mississippi, Illinois marriages, Loudoun County, Virginia land, whatever you're researching, okay? What will be returned is every single book. Now, this is a keyword search. You can do a title search, you can do an author search. This is a keyword search. What will be returned is every single book in the entire library system, our location, neighborhood library locations that match that search, okay? So my initial search gave me 119 results. Once you get the initial search, you narrow it down by library, okay? So here you can narrow it down. So you're going to narrow it down to our location, and then it narrows it down to 51 results, okay? So that's super important to remember, narrow down to our location. Same thing, I put in Loudoun cemeteries. There are only 4 because that combination of keywords only brought up 4, and they're all our books. When you can see the call number, you can go to the shelf. It's kind of an odd thing. Always, if you come and you can't find anything or you have a question, ask us, okay? Texas land, again, over 1,000, narrow it down to us, we get 220. So that's important. That's why it's important, even on any database, to look at the filters, okay? Because again, learning how to use what you're using is what's important. Okay, so our databases. Again, we're getting this page. So you click on genealogy, you're going to click on research, and then you're going to click on genealogy. Or you can click on research resources. What that brings up is a page that looks like this, and this is where the meat of the stuff is. This is where your online databases are. There are more listed below, but you can see that we have Ancestry. You can get, with a library card, you can get the Ancestry Library Edition at home. You do not need to have your own personal subscription to Ancestry. It is available at home with an HPL card. We also have our program handouts and some other links. When you go to FamilySearch, there are over 500,000, over 500,000 digital books available at FamilySearch. So when I showed you that initial search, the magic box search, the digital books are not returned in that magic box search. You have to search the books individually, okay? And you can do that with surname, you can do that with location. Before I show you, I also want to show you this research wiki. Remember when we talked about when birth, death, and marriage records were all accumulated, okay? If you go to the research wiki and you put in your state that you're researching, or you put in Revolutionary War, you will get information and links about that subject that's going to help you become educated in your research. That's where you're going to be able to find So you're looking for a marriage in Mississippi in 1850, you're not finding a marriage record. Did they even accumulate marriage records in Mississippi in 1850? Or where were they? Use the wiki. Getting back to the books, there's over 500,000 books there. This is what you'll get. It's the FamilySearch digital library. You can find what we have by putting Clayton Library in quotes. What will come up is the book. You can click on the book, you get the full book, and you can search inside the book. You can also search by Houston Public Library. You will get the book. You can search for Tavener Family. Tavener Family Histories come up. You click on the book. Inside, you can search for George Tavener. It'll be returned all the pages that George Tavener comes up on. You better hope your last name's not Town, because with digital, okay, I just say it, because all those and they come from our library. We're a partner with FamilySearch, come from Fort Wayne, Indiana, which has the largest genealogy collection in the country outside of Salt Lake. Books come from Salt Lake. Books come from Arizona, Florida, Canada, Great Britain, all these libraries, and we're all partners of this digital project. So you need to investigate that to find out what's there. All our books, you can see here's one from Boone County, Missouri that came from our collection. So you can either search directly what we have or search all 500,000 by searching by surname, by searching location. Remember also search strategy, and Irene will talk about this, quotes around the words, because that'll make it a phrase, okay? So our services that we have at the library, our newsletters, our consultations and programs, we will help you, phone, online, in person. We'll help you narrow, we'll do quick lookups for you. And by all means, we happen to think we're the cheapest psychological counseling around, because we know that when you start talking about genealogy to your family, eyes roll and people flee. Okay, so unless you're telling a story. So there is our phone number, 832-393-2600. Even if you don't really have a question, you just have a brick, you just have an idea, you want to throw and bounce an idea, or you do need some help. You don't have to be able to say, I'm researching here, we'll get you there. We'll get you there, and then give you ideas on how to find what you're looking for. We have a newsletter, as I mentioned. Then you can subscribe to our newsletter. This is our quarterly newsletter. It's called the Clayton Town Crier. And you can see that it is text-based, where we're giving you information about sources and other things that you can use. We also have something called our Clayton Extra, which lists our programs. Each month we put on programs. So you subscribe to all those just by through that link. And you can also see what kind of events we have coming up. If you don't want to subscribe to the newsletter, you go to houstonlibrary.org, click on events, put in genealogy, and you can put the dates in, and it'll bring it up, and then you just register. Our upcoming programs. I did this. Here's our upcoming programs. Next week, we have the 19th and 20th century Mexican ancestors. In November, you can see what we have doing Find My Past, which is another subscription database, Native Americans and do-it-yourself oral histories. October is Family History Month, where we love family history. We also love Halloween. And so these, we do a lot of programming, and you can go to events and click on it, put in genealogy, do the date parameters, and sign up for these. You can see that we're doing all kinds of things. Female ancestors, funeral records. There's one on organizing. Carrie Taplin is a national speaker. Okay, did I get everything? Thomas McKenty, another national speaker. So visiting Clayton. Our stuff is organized alphabetically by state. That's why we need to know where you're researching. Okay, when you go to the shelf, you'll find family histories, but you'll also find indexes to vital records, land records, birth records, court records, all with a time period. And so when you go to the shelf, if that book has your time period in it, you should be looking at it. There's a book called Murders in Old Virginia that covers like 1800 to maybe 1850 or whatever time period it comes. You might not have had somebody that was murdered, okay? But your family lived in that county during that time period. They might have been a witness. They might have been a judge. They might have been a lawyer. They might have been a victim, okay? You need to look at that book if it covers your time period. We have over 15,000 family histories upstairs that are organized alphabetical by surname. So when you come, I can't tell you enough to try and identify, because when you walk in that door, whether it's us, whether it's a location that you're going to as a trip, you will feel empowered if you can articulate your question. Okay? And sometimes you have to articulate it to more than one person, because honestly, we talked earlier, I'm third generation American. I do revolutionary research, okay, but I don't have personal experience in revolutionary research, okay. I have a colleague who does Revolutionary War research. There are 8 of us there. We all have subject specificity, and then we also have generalities. And you will get answers from each one of us that are different. Neither one of them are right or wrong. They're just different, okay, because of our knowledge base. Use the library catalog. You can bring your own device. You can bring your iPad, you can bring your laptop, and you can access the databases inside the library. Bring change for copy machines. We sit in the museum district. We don't got any change, man. You're going to use copies. The machine will also take cards. Bring a sweater because it's cold. We got free parking. Open stacks, you have at it, organized by state and county for browsing. And then, as I mentioned, always ask us a question. We have to be there till 5 or 6 o'clock. Our job is to answer questions. You never bother us, okay? Don't be afraid to come up. I'm trying to get the team to go out and walk the floor. Our hours, we opened back up after the pandemic. We were closed for 14 months. We closed March 16th. We opened up May 11th, 20 to 21. We were doing research for people, but because really family history is a personal browsing, it did not work too well. There's our phone number to call us. We can do further Zoom presentations for you. We've got a whole list of stuff that we can do. And so your job right now is, after all this, is to figure out what you want to know. Create your grocery list, okay, of what you want to know, work on your pedigree chart, figure it out, and come down to us. I mean, it's super simple. I know it doesn't seem simple, but it really is, if you think about it. So, thank you. That's the end of it. Now, does anybody have any questions?
I don't.
Okay, no questions. I talked about, do you want to see really quick how I wrote my own story, which is really important if you don't want to do this heavy duty research. It won't take long. You want to go for a minute?
I would love to, yeah.
Okay, all right. So what I did was, a lot of people, really aren't into, the heavy duty research, or, but we understand the value of passing on the stories and keeping the stories alive. Okay, this is the wrong slide, but okay. So what I did was, I actually went out to the internet, and pretty quickly, from the things that I heard from my mother and stuff that I knew, I wrote my own story. Okay, I did this in about maybe 15 minutes. Okay. Because I was putting together a presentation at last minute. This is me and my sister, okay, in Illinois. And I call this my just off the boat picture because of the scarf, okay? I look like I just came off the boat, but it's a time period. It's the 1960s, okay? This is probably 1962, okay? All right, so here is something that's interesting. This is actually my naturalization from my great-grandfather, Sam. So I want to know what I could find about Sam. Now, remember I talked about finding an original document. This document says that my grandmother was born in New York in 1910. My grandmother always told me she was born in 1912, okay? Well, I'm thinking, Grammy, what do you know? I mean, your father should know, okay? But her birth certificate, which was in her safe deposit box when she died, said 1912. So when you look at a document, even though her father created it, you just got to be careful. Okay, so here's Sam. Sam is a lady's tailor. Okay, Sam came from Russia. Sam came on the Carmania. This is a 19 15 naturalization from Chicago. In 1906, the federal government came in and standardized the forms. So pre-1906, you might not be very lucky to get all this information. After 1906, chances are you will. Okay, so we're going to talk about Sam, who's a ladies' tailor who ended up in Chicago on Milwaukee Avenue. Okay, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at that. Okay, so he's a ladies' tailor. He's a ladies' tailor, and he was a ladies' tailor in Russia. Okay, he was also a ladies' tailor in New York and then also Chicago. So he's a Jewish immigrant. And so what did Jewish immigrants do in New York? Okay, so I found a website. I put in ladies' tailor Russia 1880. Up came some websites, Jewish immigrant entrepreneurship, and these pictures came up. So I learned a little bit about what it looked like, okay, and what he did. I found out about immigration through Poland, from Poland and Russia, through the Library of Congress. Again, putting in Russian immigration, 1900, okay? What am I searching? Here is a picture that my cousin sent me of my great-grandfather, Sam, in front of his ladies' tailor store, all right, on Milwaukee Avenue. So what I did was, this is a city directory. This is an example. I went to the 1923 city directory. I put in Google, Chicago city directories. Actually, up came the New York Public Library, because there's Chicago city directories that are digitized at the New York Public Library. So, you know, there's just all kinds of stuff everywhere. And here it is, Samuel, Ladies Furnishings, 2640 Milwaukee Avenue. Like it said, on his naturalization, that's right. So then I go to Google, okay? And I plot out 2600 Milwaukee Avenue, all right? So here it is. There's a street view. Kind of looks like it did in the photo, right? Here's the satellite view, here's this view, here's the street view of the address, and here is the store and what it looks like now, okay? You just learned a lot about me and my great-grandfather, all right? My mother, I was born in March. My mother always told me that I was the first red-haired baby at the hospital in Park Ridge, Illinois. I'm thinking to myself, Mom, man, how did that happen? Okay, I mean, I understand that we're rare, but really the first one? So I went out and I put in Lutheran General, Park Ridge, Illinois, and I happened to find that in Lutheran General Hospital was relocated from Chicago in 1959 to Park Ridge. I was born in March. If they relocated at the end of 1959 and I have red hair, maybe I was the first red hair baby at the hospital. I was born in March, 3 months later, okay, depending on when they moved out. Is it a true story? I can't figure that out, but it might be, okay? What happened on my birthday? I think we've all looked at websites. Here's some other stuff, okay? What happened on my birthday is Sputnik went up, I think. I lived in Elk Grove Village outside of O'Hare, okay, O'Hare Airport. I put in Elk Grove Village, okay? Here's what O'Hare looked like in 1960. We used to feed the elks when we were little. That's not me, but we used to feed the elks, okay? I grew up in Chicago. The big snowstorm in Chicago. Here's pictures of that. This is all part of me that I'm finding out on the internet. The Democratic Convention riots in 1968. My mother, we did not live downtown. My mother still wouldn't let me go out of the house in 1968. She was afraid. But I remember that snow in 67. And then here's things that are from my childhood also. The Ford Galaxy car that my mother had. We would go shopping at the Jewel store. Remember the rotary phone? There were our child seats. And then remember when the push button phones came out? These are all stories that we can build off of. And I just found these pictures on the internet. Here's where I went to school. I went to school at Sullivan High School. I went to college at Southern Illinois University. I went and got my graduate degree at Dominican University in Chicago outside of the city. This is a picture. Here's Southern Illinois, and this is Dominican. So I got my library degree in 1999. I am a pet parent. These are my cats. Okay, this is Fisher, this is Oscar, this is Stella, this is Lucy, this is Harry, this is Walter, and this is Sam. Okay, and remember, we become ancestors. So if you don't want to do the documents, okay? At the very least, do something like that, save it, because we know that if it's not digital, the little ones won't look at it, okay? And save it and hand it off. And that's the end of it. That's the end of it, you guys. There you go. Thank you. This is one of my
Thank
favorite.
you.
This is one of my, the idea of the social history is really one of my favorite things. You know, because it's so important to pass down those stories. You know, so it's a minute after. I'm more than happy if anybody has any questions. I did time. Thank you for humoring me and letting me show you my cat pictures, which is what it was really all about. You're muted, Robin.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. And then if there's any questions or people